Hare Krishna. Please accept my respectful obeisances. After that, I think I should just sit down now. Vishaka's said so nicely. Of course, in my situation in Columbus and Louisville, we're always very happy to have a dhoti come and lead kirtan because we do it every day. So, but actually, just recently when Padma Goswami was visiting in Columbus, and all the girls from all the centers, the different centers the traveling parties were in, and everybody was feeling really enthusiastic, and a fairly remarkable kirtan took place. And there was also other Prabhus and Sankirtan parties, the dhotis were there, as we say. And but this kirtan was being led by one Mataji. It was following Guru Puja, and it just kept enveloping, and pretty soon everybody in a dhoti was like on the side of the wall. And even Padma Goswami was on the side of the wall. But it was a very friendly, just spontaneous thing, but it was, I guess you could say, pretty wild. And afterwards, one of the men came up and said to me, he says, "Now I know what the women feel like." Oh. But actually, early on, it just really wasn't that way for us. I remember the first time we heard that things were a little different, I was in London, and we heard that there was maybe a different position for women, but we couldn't believe it because we were in London and we were just trying to get this temple for Prabhupada, so we kind of discounted it. And then after London, we got sent to, some of us, to India, and when you're breaking new ground, you don't have so much time to consider some of these things. And so, anyways, it happened, not as far as I could experience through Prabhupada, it happened following Prabhupada. But the topic, how Prabhupada empowered us, I see it personally more how he encouraged us, that he never discouraged us. That was my personal experience. And that took place in so many dimensions. How he sent us to England, and it wasn't that he sent our husbands and we went along. He sent us, all of us. It was a very united front, and there was definitely no question of dominancy in that early group of pioneers in England. You know, we were all pulling and digging and pushing together. That's how things were happening. On a personal experience in Sridham Mayapur at the cornerstone laying ceremony, Srila Prabhupada was there with his godbrothers were there of his, and his young sannyasis were there with their dandas, and the Matajis were there, and it came time for someone to speak. Srila Prabhupada looked around, and we're all thinking, who's going to speak? You know, so many qualified speakers were there, and he looked at me and asked me to speak. And I don't know, I'm not a particularly brilliant speaker. I was, at the time, just being in Prabhupada's presence with his godbrothers there, and just the whole atmosphere of that cornerstone laying ceremony was very heady. You know, you just felt very quiet within yourself and glad to be there. So the idea of getting up and speaking in front of these great exalted personalities, but there was no question of even considering that too. You know, just you felt that for a flicker, but Prabhupada is saying to get up and speak, and you have to respond to the request of your spiritual master. And I could only speak about Srila Prabhupada in front of these exalted Vaishnavas. What could I say? But afterwards, I remember Gargamuni Maharaj at the time came up and he thanked me and he said, "That was so nice, what you said about Srila Prabhupada." But I was feeling that actually it was Srila Prabhupada. And on another occasion in Juhu, I can't remember the year, but it was in the early part when we were still living in tents, but there was some congregation of life members and supporters, and Prabhupada was trying to rally them around to come forward to help get this project out of the tents and into the realities, and we were there. And then he looked around, he wanted someone to speak, and everybody was looking at Tamal Krishna. Prabhupada looked at me and said, "You speak." And I had my daughter. She was maybe 2.5 at the time. And the only person there was Tamal Krishna. So he got my daughter and I had to speak. Then after that, I went back, I got my daughter, and then Srila Prabhupada asked Tamal Krishna to speak. Following that. So, he definitely was, I don't think he saw it as the male-female issue. He saw it as spreading Krishna consciousness. And for me, that's all it's ever been. And that's, in my center, that's all we're trying to do. And when I started that service, I wasn't thinking, well, I'll have a Mataji Mandir. It just kind of happened that way. It wasn't precisely what I had in mind. And the mood there is simply to serve Srila Prabhupada. And at the same time, we understand we're at these particular bodies. There's times when we have to be reticent, and there's times when, there's no boundaries to the display of enthusiasm. And there's no limit to the courage that's available in the hearts of those devotees, male or female, who want to serve Srila Prabhupada. Oh. Srila Prabhupada was also extremely sensitive to all of his devotees and to his lady disciples. One devotee in New Vrindavan who's his disciple, but because the disciples didn't always get to see Srila Prabhupada so often, she only had one personal exchange. But I remember this because she told this to me, and she's a wonderful devotee. Her name is Gopalasha Priya. Many of you may know her and her husband Damodar from your visits in New Vrindavan. So Srila Prabhupada was in New Vrindavan, and all the devotees were there sitting around his lotus feet. And it was a little chilly, and he looked and he saw that she had just arrived and she didn't have a sweater on. He said, "Are you all right? Are you warm enough?" And that was the only words he ever personally spoke to her. But that acknowledgement of her presence and concern for her condition locked the love for Srila Prabhupada forever within her heart. And Srila Prabhupada was capable of responding to a devotee in a crowd just as if no one else was there. At one point I had come to see him. I was at the time in Amsterdam, and I was leaving Amsterdam, and I came to the farm in Paris, outside of Paris. And I went into a room, and there was a darshan going on, and I came in quietly into the room. But suddenly he said, "Oh, Malati, you are here." Just immediately acknowledging. And sometimes I think, even as women, we're afraid to acknowledge each other. I don't think the problem is completely, men and women. I think even as Matajis, we have difficulty acknowledging each other. And I think if we work on this, the other difficulty, when and where it exists, will resolve itself. But we can take the cue from Srila Prabhupada and not be afraid to express our love and affection to each other. Hare Krishna.